Breaking a bone isn't a big deal. If you're my wife, be here in 3 minutes.
While I was in the hospital, my husband insisted that I attend Samantha's wedding. He showed zero concern for my well-being. I finally confronted him, saying,
"As of now, I quit being your wife." "What?"
Caught off guard, he let out a gasp. "This is my chance." I started my counterattack. "I'll make him regret ever looking down on me. My name is Rachel, I'm 28. I have an older brother, Alexander, who is 4 years older than me. Both my parents are gone. They passed away when I was in middle school. At the time, Alexander was in high school. He dropped out to support me and got to work. I remember him juggling multiple part-time jobs. Alexander has been working at a certain company for about 10 years now. He was directly scouted by Joseph, the company's CEO, who valued Alexander's character. Alexander often mentions Joseph. He seems to have a deep respect for him, almost like a father figure. Joseph's nephew, Brian, was introduced to me 2 years ago. Alexander came home from work one day and said,
"Joseph wants to introduce his nephew to you. What do you think?"
I wasn't seeing anyone at the time, so I quickly accepted the offer. I thought, if it's the nephew of Joseph, whom Alexander trusts, he must be a good person. Having a boyfriend would put Alexander at ease, especially if it's Joseph's nephew. 2 weeks later, I was introduced to Brian. After a few dinner dates, he asked me to be his girlfriend. He was friendly, considerate, and adored his own sister. He reminded me of Alexander, and I immediately liked him. I agreed on the spot and began dating Brian. After a year of dating, we tied the knot. But 6 months into the marriage, I saw Brian's true colors.
"Samantha is coming back home."
Brian excitedly told me this a month ago. Samantha is Brian's sister, making her my sister-in-law. She had been living alone in the neighboring state but decided to move back home until her wedding day. Brian's family home is only about a 15-minute walk from our house. Thrilled about his sister's return, Brian was in high spirits. The night before Samantha was set to move in with her in-laws, Brian suddenly said this:
"Samantha is coming home tomorrow. Get everything ready to welcome her."
I left my job to focus on homemaking after we got married. So, I get that handling the household chores is my responsibility. Even so, I was slightly irked by the commanding tone in Brian's voice. "Why the rush? I'm sure Samantha's parents are also excited for her return. Can't she come some other time?"
"Samantha comes first for me. I married you to have you serve her. Now you can finally fulfill that role, so get to work."
I was speechless. Brian continued,
"Don't you dare complain to Alexander. If I ask Joseph, he can fire your precious Alexander in no time. You can't be serious. Do as you're told, and you won't have to worry. Got it?"
I was devastated by his thinly veiled threat. Samantha, true to Brian's word, treated me like a servant. If I so much as frowned, she'd say,
"I'll tell Joseph,"
and smirk along with Brian. I had no choice but to comply. She treated me like a slave and occasionally demanded money. I drew the line there, but Samantha smugly retorted,
"Brian said, if you need money, ask Rachel. So, cough it up. Otherwise, I'll tell Joseph you were mean to me."
I was at my wit's end. I withdrew some savings I'd built up before marriage and gave them to Samantha. I didn't want to be a burden to Alexander, who had always supported me. The only option left was to obey Brian and Samantha. The only glimmer of hope was that Samantha's stay at my in-laws was temporary. She's set to get officially married the day after the wedding ceremony, and then they'll move to a new home in a different state. Until then, I have to hang on. That's what I kept telling myself to get through each day. One evening, just 3 days away from Samantha's wedding, Brian came home from work and dropped a bombshell.
"Prepare $10,000 as a wedding gift for Samantha." "What?"
I couldn't help but blurt out in a voice tinged with shock and anger. Brian turned toward me, wearing a displeased expression. "Look,
I don't mind if you don't want to, but if you don't listen, we're getting a divorce. And your brother's job is done for.
I was speechless, stunned by the threat of divorce from my husband. Before I could say anything, Brian doubled down. Hey, I can divorce you anytime, you know. And with that, he waved a signed divorce paper in front of me. In a fit of frustration, I snatched the paper away from him. I shot him a piercing glare, but he remained defiant. Go ahead, make my day. Divorce me, and you and your brother are doomed. Hopeless, I felt cornered. I stormed out of the house, aimlessly wandering the nighttime streets. Why did it come to this? Devastated, mentally and physically, I felt completely lost. While attempting to descend a pedestrian bridge, my foot slipped. Ah! Before I could scream, I tumbled down to the ground below. I passed out as I hit the cold pavement. When I came to, I found myself in a hospital bed. Where am I? My brother Alexander peered into my face, full of concern.
Rachel, are you all right?
I was utterly confused. Observing my condition, Alexander explained what had happened. Last night, a passerby found me collapsed under the pedestrian bridge and called an ambulance. I had fractured my leg and would need a significant time to fully recover. I was even told I'd require long-term hospitalization and rehab. Alexander looked at me intently after his explanation.
Why were you out at that hour? Brian hasn't even visited you in the hospital. Did something happen between you two?
I could feel Alexander's genuine concern. I broke down, unable to hold back any longer.
He only married me to use me. He threatened to fire you, Alexander, if I don't obey. I wanted to protect you, but now he's demanding $10,000 for Samantha's wedding gift.
Alexander probably couldn't make heads or tails of my rambling. Even so, he nodded and simply said,
You've been through a lot.
After a good cry, I began to regain some semblance of composure. Alexander was radiating an aura of anger. After hearing my whole story, he smiled gently at me.
You didn't have to worry about me. What I can't stand is seeing Rachel hurting. But thanks for having my back.
He playfully tapped the top of my head. Despite being almost 30, it made me feel oddly secure. My phone rang right after I finished telling Alexander everything. It was a message from Brian.
Hospitalized, huh? Don't think that's getting you out of our wedding gift. Have a 10K ready, and come back now. Tomorrow's Samantha's wedding.
He's always so concerned about Samantha, not a care about my health. Something inside me snapped. Enough is enough. I'm not putting up with this man anymore. That day I left home. I took my wallet, the phone, and divorce papers. I spread the divorce papers on the table and signed them without hesitation. Alexander offered to submit the papers for me. He also updated Joseph on the situation. Fortunately, Joseph wasn't as concerned as I thought he would be. Now, I can finally stand up to him. The next day, I answered one of Brian's ignored calls.
Don't you dare ignore me!
The first thing out of his mouth was a shout. He was visibly angry. Brian raised his voice without even waiting for my reply.
You planning on skipping Samantha's wedding? A fracture isn't that big a deal. Get over here in 3 minutes. And bring the gift money. I just quit being your wife. What?
Caught off guard, he was speechless.
What do you mean? Quit the nonsense and get over here. Or else I'll tell Joseph. I'm simply stating facts. We're divorced now. So, no wedding and no gift. Want to tell Joseph? Go ahead. Your threats don't work anymore.
He didn't know Alexander had already informed Joseph. Brian tried another threat.
Don't mess around. Do you want Alexander to lose his job? Is that okay? After all he did for you?
Brian seemed a bit panicked, perhaps because I was unusually defiant. Staying silent all this time now seemed so foolish. I decided to clue him in.
Alexander won't be fired. You will. Alexander already told Joseph you've been threatening me. Joseph is not happy with you. That can't be. Joseph has been very fond of me. I was even fast-tracked into the company. There's no way he'd fire me.
Believe what you want. You'll find out soon enough. Are you at Samantha's venue? If you are, try finding Joseph. I bet you can't. Your little scheme with your sister has already been reported. There's no way. Joseph is livid. Not only is Brian getting fired, but Samantha's little scheme will also come to light. Have fun at the wedding. My ex-husband seemed incredulous at my words. Now that I have nothing to fear, there's no need for me to be intimidated by him anymore. When I raised my voice, Brian responded with a submissive tone. Poor big brother of yours. Quit high school just to support his sister, and now he'll lose his job because of that sister. You think an underdog like him can easily find another job? Even Alexander will start disliking you, you know? Don't call my brother an underdog. You're the real underdog here.
You sure you want to say that? I'm really going to fire him. Apologize now and bring me $1 million and you're off the hook. You're Samantha's personal servant, after all. Bring me the $1 million now.
I completely lost my cool with my condescending ex-husband. Forgetting I was in a hospital, I shouted into the phone.
The one who needs to apologize is you.
What? Stunned by my loud voice, I didn't hold back. I won't forgive you even if you apologize. You're definitely getting fired. And your wedding? I bet none of your family will even show up. Joseph's been talking to everyone, you know?
No way! Joseph wouldn't do that.
Well, they aren't at the venue, are they? Maybe it's time to realize you and your sister have been written off. The whole family's disgusted with you. Shame. Even Samantha probably won't forgive you. Hearing this, Brian let out a cry that almost sounded like a scream. And why shouldn't he? Losing his servant of a wife, alienated by family, and even potentially hated by his sister. He's got every reason to scream. I guess we're done here, I said to my ex, now presumably understanding the gravity of his situation. Enjoy your wedding, if it even happens. I hung up without waiting for Brian's response. After that, both Brian and Samantha called multiple times, but I ignored them. Eventually, they gave up and sent emails instead.
Rachel, I was wrong. I won't call you a servant anymore. Please come back. Samantha's wedding will be ruined without you. Please attend and explain everything to Uncle. Rachel, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. You don't have to bring $1 million. Just bring 10,000 and come right away. I won't be able to have the ceremony, let alone register our marriage.
They're still prioritizing their wedding at this point. I can only be flabbergasted at Samantha saying, 10,000 is fine. We're not family anymore. I sent the same message back to both of them. More calls and emails came, but I didn't respond. Sometime later, Alexander came to my hospital room. Following him was Brian's uncle. As soon as Joseph locked eyes with me, he deeply bowed his head. My nephew really messed up. I'm truly sorry. I never thought he'd be such a person. Don't worry, it's not Joseph's fault. Keep your head up. I've fired Brian. From now on, both Brian and Samantha will get the cold shoulder from the entire family. I'll also talk to his father. I'm sure he'll discipline him. Is that so? Finally, it's over. Hearing Joseph's words, I felt relieved for the first time. Just as Joseph promised, Brian lost his job. Seems like his job hunt is struggling. He's never really looked for a job before. Samantha, who received pushback from all relatives, had her wedding canceled, just as expected. Not only was their wedding canceled, but they were also ordered to pay for the cancellation fees. They're now disowned by their parents and live in a cramped apartment with no one to turn to. Brian is blamed by Samantha almost daily, saying, "This is all your fault." What was supposed to be happy co-living with his beloved sister turned into daily agony for him. Serves them right. As for me, thanks to Joseph's offer, I'm now working at the same company as Alexander. We've resumed our life together, just the two of us, living freely without any family interference. From now on, I plan to live a good life, supporting each other with Alexander. I'm a 33-year-old office worker. My husband, Tony, is 5 years older and we've been married for 7 years. Currently, due to certain circumstances, I live with my mother. Please ask me how I ended up in this situation. Going back 2 years, Tony and I built a house. At the time, Tony had just switched jobs and we didn't have much in the way of savings or income. Tony's previous job was at a major corporation. However, he suffered from insidious harassment from his boss, leading to sleepless nights and, a few months later, he became unable to go to work. He consulted a psychiatrist and took a leave of absence for about 3 months, but with no signs of recovery, he ultimately resigned. After that, we managed to live on my salary alone. Tony, unemployed for 2 months, began to regain his energy. He started eating well and sleeping again, and his psychiatrist was happy about his speedy recovery. My positive, beloved Tony was back. From there, he vigorously searched for a job. His experience at a major corporation was an advantage, but due to his reason for resignation being mental health, finding a new job wasn't easy. During this time, we found a small company that needed him. His salary was about 2/3 of what he used to earn, but seeing his eyes shine as he said, "It's way better than being jobless. Let's do this," made me happy. Moreover, it was in the field he wanted. We wanted to have children, but it was clear that life would become difficult if I stopped working. As a result, and because I also love my job, we gave up on having children. At the time, we didn't think about building a house as it was just the two of us. However, a cloud overshadowed our peaceful life. My mother, Karen, became paralyzed due to a traffic accident and had to live in a wheelchair. Since my father passed away when I was in middle school, Karen had been living alone. Our mother-in-law home was an old house. It was far from being wheelchair-friendly with many steps. Tony then suggested, "I'm worried, let's live together." Karen and I were surprised, but I love this kind of unexpected kindness from Tony. Tony had just changed jobs, so we didn't know what would happen, but we decided to apply for a mortgage. As expected, it was difficult to get a loan due to the short length of his current employment. But we possess something unbeatable: determination and an unbreakable spirit, our greatest strengths. We persisted, trying out a 5th mortgage company. It was indeed difficult to get Tony's loan approved, but the loan officer proposed various options to us. We took a chance on one of these proposals, and it led to a successful loan approval. We finally decided to buy our own home. I had always dreamt of living in a house filled with the scent of wood. Thick, exposed wooden beams on the ceiling, customized storage spaces designed just for us. A kitchen adjusted to my short stature, and spacious flooring made of cypress. Of course, it is a barrier-free single-story house. The house is perfect for comfortable living in a wheelchair. We couldn't wait for it to be completed and made a daily routine of visiting the construction site. Then our painstakingly designed dream home was finished. It has a large yard where my mother, who had become reluctant to go out, can now enjoy sunbathing. However, there was one dissatisfaction. The land on which we built was given to us by Tony's grandfather. Tony's mother-in-law wasn't particularly rich, but his grandfather adored him. But then, Tony's grandfather was suddenly diagnosed with cancer. Upon learning of his illness, he began to distribute his assets. Tony received the largest plot of land, as per his grandfather's wishes. It felt like winning the lottery, but there was a major catch. The land was just a 5-minute walk from Tony's mother-in-law home. When we told them that my mother would be moving in with us, Tony's sister laughed and said, "Why is your mother moving in too? How shameless is your mother-in-law? I knew marrying a strange woman like you would cause trouble." Tony's mother also snidely remarked, "Isn't it awful for my son to be dragged into caring for the elderly? Aren't you some kind of curse?" Even during these times, Tony defended my mother and me, saying, "It's the land that Grandpa gave me. There's no reason for anyone to complain." Tony's mother and sister are quite malicious, almost world-class. I think it's a miracle that such a kind person like Tony was raised in that mother-in-law. To me, he's like a beautiful lotus flower blooming out of the mud. Tony always said about his family,
I have two great examples of what not to be at home.
But I'm sure the reason Tony's grandfather gave us this land was probably because he wanted us to look after his mother in her old age. He also had other properties and gave Tony's sister a parking lot located 10 minutes walk from their mother-in-law home. In terms of size, it's about 2/3 of the land that Tony received. However, it already has a full parking contract, so the monthly parking lot income is significant. Personally, I would have preferred that. But you can't complain about a gift. It is something to be grateful for. In reality, thanks to my GIL, we were able to build a house. Having no cost for the land and being able to use it as collateral for a loan made a big difference. Once the house was completed, we invited my mother-in-law and sister-in-law's mother-in-law. However, during construction, we heard from the builders that they had come to see the house several times without our permission. They arrived an hour and a half later than the agreed time without any apology.
Pardon our intrusion. This is kind of like Grandpa's house too, so it's kind of like our house as well. Oh, such a nice house. The smell of wood is nice, no need for air fresheners,
said my sister-in-law as she waltzed in. Even though her shoes were muddy because of the rain, she didn't mind at all and went straight into our newly built house. Her husband also walked around in muddy shoes, ignoring the slippers we had prepared. When I urged,
"We have slippers available, if you'd like to wear them,"
my sister-in-law laughed and replied, "It's such a hassle, you can just wipe the floor." From the get-go, the atmosphere was terrible. And, of course, they came empty-handed. After touring the rooms, they reached my mother's room. My mother's room is the most spacious and has the best sunlight. At my mother's request, we designed it like a duplex, complete with a kitchen. It's a room like a second living area. Seeing this, my mother-in-law said,
"I'm fine with this room. I want to live here."
An absurd thing to say. Furthermore, my mother-in-law told my mother,
"You were fortunate to have that accident, weren't you? Thanks to being paraplegic, you've moved from that old shack to such a nice house. Isn't it a turn of fortune?"
My mother said nothing, but she looked so sad. Inside, I was boiling over with anger. But before I could respond, Tony spoke up.
"What did you just say? There are things you can and can't say to people. It makes me question your humanity. I don't even want to think that you're part of my mother-in-law. You're the worst. Apologize now,"
Tony said in a strong tone. Whether they found this amusing or not, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law glared at me. Then my sister-in-law confronted Tony with a heated look.
"What? What's this all about? That's a total turn off. It's not cool to invite people and then treat them like that. Just because you built a house doesn't mean you can act all high and mighty."
The mother-in-law joined in, too.
"Anyway, my son went off the rails because he ended up with a wife like you. You are a jinx."
Tony didn't stay sister-in-law either.
"Enough is enough. This mess started because of your rude remarks. You were saying that the accident was a good thing, and calling my wife a jinx. I won't forgive you for that."
The mother-in-law and sister-in-law looked frustrated by Tony's strong rebuttal. Then, my mother, who had been watching the whole scene, apologized with a regretful look. "It's okay. I'm living together with them because I actually had an accident, and it's true that I was able to live in this beautiful house from a rundown one. Your son has always been kind to me. Thank you." Perhaps feeling guilty, the mother-in-law and sister-in-law left, shooting me a nasty look. My mother then apologized to Tony. "I'm sorry. I must have upset your mother and sisters. I'm sorry I ruined the mood on the day of the housewarming party because of me." Tony also said,
"No, I should be the one apologizing. It's embarrassing. They really lack decency. I'm really sorry. But I am happy to be living with you, please understand that."
With that, my mother started to tear up. Since it's near Tony's parents' house, the neighbors are all people we know. They all know Tony since he was a child, so they're very kind to us. 4 months have passed since that mess. When we were finally getting used to our new home, and my mother started to smother-in-law more, an incident occurred. I received a call from home while I was at work. We rarely get calls from home, so it startled me. My bad feeling came true. My mother, unable to hide her agitation, called me.
It's awful. Tony collapsed at work.
I, too, was agitated by the serious tone. I immediately consulted with my boss and headed to the hospital. On the way, I tried to remain calm by unconsciously imagining positive scenarios like,
when I get to the hospital, he'll be all right, and joking around to keep me in good spirits.
But when I arrived at the hospital, I couldn't believe my eyes. My husband, who was supposed to have gone to work cheerfully after eating breakfast as usual. We were supposed to have a movie date this weekend. But now, what I see is him, with countless tubes connected to his body. I was completely lost. The doctor said,
he's in a very dangerous condition. Even if he survives, we don't know if he will regain consciousness.
I felt as if I was in a movie, and I couldn't even cry. I prayed fervently. Yet, my prayers went unanswered. My husband, Tony, passed away just like that. In my state of shock, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law showed up, as expected. When they heard that Tony had passed away, my sister-in-law aggressively asked,
did you poison him or something? Were you after his life insurance money? Did you poison him or something? Were you after his life insurance money?
Following suit, my mother-in-law cornered me too.
Bad things always happen when you're around. Just like your mother. You really are a jinx.
I was so sad, I couldn't speak. Just then, my mother arrived in a caregiver's taxi. She was crying at the circumstances of Tony's death. Seeing my mother's tears, I was finally able to cry as well. As the two of us sobbed loudly, my mother-in-law said,
oh, stop it. Can you quit the fake crying? My son changed after meeting you too. Now that my son is gone, I don't want to see your faces ever again. Don't appear before us again.
And then she left the hospital. From there, we had a funeral director come in and arrange the schedule for the funeral. We headed to the funeral home. Tony's cause of death was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. I can't believe it, he was fine until morning. When I informed my mother-in-law about the funeral schedule, she replied unexpectedly,
he always sided with you too, so I won't attend the funeral. My daughter won't come either.
Many people from Tony's company and his friends attended the viewing. However, neither my mother-in-law nor my sister-in-law and her husband were present. It's unbelievable, but maybe that's just the kind of people they were. Many people attended the funeral too, and I could tell that Tony was loved by many. There were many who shed tears for his untimely death. I was glad to spend the whole day with them who sincerely miss my husband. I had received an email from my mother-in-law after Tony's death. But its content was inappropriate, so I didn't reply. The email was asking about the amount of life insurance money. She kept emailing because I hadn't replied, and eventually said,
I have a right to receive it.
I wasn't in a position to deal with it, so I ignored it. When we arrived at our house, I saw light seeping out of the room. My mother, Karen, looked puzzled and said,
that's strange. I thought we turned off all the lights. Maybe I forgot to turn it off because I was too agitated.
I replied, that's all right. It's only natural to be upset given the situation. And unlocked the door to our house. Sure enough, we could hear the sound of a TV coming from inside. Definitely weird. My mom and I exchanged glances, then fearfully entered the room. There, sitting in the room were my sister-in-law and her husband.
What are you doing?
I was so surprised that I couldn't even raise my voice. The living room was filled with unfamiliar furniture and boxes. We had absolutely no clue what was happening. My sister-in-law then said,
why did you just barge in here? Well, it's your first time, so I'll let you off the hook. We're taking this house. We sold your stuff, so leave.
My mother and I were utterly stunned. We had no idea what was going on. When I asked,
where did our stuff and furniture go?
She nonchalantly replied,
we had a resale company come today and they took everything. You had some pretty good furniture. We got a good price for it. We bought this furniture with that money. Who wants furniture that a dead person used? It's bad luck, isn't it? I'm the type to care about such things. Your stuff is packed in these boxes. I don't know if you're minimalists or just poor, but it was a relief that you had so few things.
The furniture was carefully chosen by my husband. I absolutely couldn't forgive them. My mom was also furious, her face turning beet red, but she was too shocked to reply. I immediately called the resale company. After explaining the situation, they agreed to treat the items as stolen and return them. Honestly, now that my husband is gone, I want nothing to do with his mother-in-law. But I do feel a desire to stay in the house filled with memories of him. As I was struggling with these feelings, my mother said to me in a voice only I could hear,
"What do you think Tony would say if you were here now? Maybe he'd say we should leave?"
I'm sure that's true. Tony always used to say,
"It's worth spending time with people who understand you. But there are also people who just won't get it, no matter how much you explain. It's a waste of time dealing with those low-level aliens."
He was in fact talking about his mother and sister. I can see it clearly now. If we continue to live here, his mother-in-law and relatives will keep interfering. I impulsively signed a lease on an accessible apartment. My mother was taken aback by my decisiveness. I asked the resale company to keep the furniture for a few days, and it was moved to the new apartment 3 days later. In exchange for moving out, I made the mother-in-law and sister-in-law promise to cut ties with us. And so, a new life began with just my mother and me in the apartment. It seems that Tony had so many life insurance policies it was almost obsessive. Tony often joked, always with a mother-in-law,
"When I die, you guys will be rich."
True to his word, my husband left my mother and me enough money to be comfortable for the rest of our lives. He was unable to secure a mortgage when we bought the house. So, being an employee at a major corporation, I purchased the house under my name. I ensured that, even if something happened to Tony first, I certainly wasn't stupid enough to continue paying a mortgage for a house I wouldn't live in. Under the original contract, the house would be auctioned off if the mortgage wasn't paid for 3 months. In the hustle and bustle of life, 3 months passed in a flash. Then, I received a barrage of calls from my sister-in-law, Jessica, with astounding fury. My call history was filled with Jessica and my mother-in-law, Linda.
"What the heck? This is seriously scary. It's like something out of a horror movie."
I thought it was a little horror movie. Since they were being incredibly persistent, I picked up the phone only to find out they were furious that the house was being sold. Apparently, when they returned home, they were unable to get in, and there was a seizure notice. Jessica and her husband moved out of the apartment they had been living in since Tony passed away. Jessica had also quit her job. I suggested they move back to their parents' house since they were panicking about suddenly being homeless. To my surprise, Linda had become so involved in gambling that she couldn't keep up and had sold her own house. It seems they have been living together for the past 2 months. From what I hear, they even sold their primary source of income, a parking lot in front of the train station, a long time ago. Now, Linda and Jessica's mother-in-law are completely homeless. When Linda said, "I'm sorry for everything. Let's get along. Can you lend me some money, please?" I replied,
"I think it's best if you stay away since I'm a jinx. We're strangers now that we've severed ties." Linda fell sister-in-law and after mumbling a week.
In my mind, I was laughing, thinking,
"Who's the real bad luck charm here?"
Then, when I said,
"I won't lend you a single cent,"
Jessica, who had been listening to the conversation next to Linda, shouted,
"You devil! Bring us the money right now!" "Hee hee, I'm a devil and bad luck, so I'm going to hang up now,"
I replied and ended the call. In truth, I had a lawyer involved for the past 3 months, pushing for the auction of the house. I thought it was an unusual case, but apparently, it's not that uncommon. The house was sold without any major trouble, allowing our mother-in-law a moment of respite. We plan to find a new home with the money Tony left us. Given it's just my mother and I, we don't need a big house. We'd rather prioritize security as 2 women living together. And so, I chose a condominium with minimal noise disturbance. I remember something my husband always said when we built our home.
"People can get energy from the sun. So let's create a place where mother-in-law can enjoy her hobby of reading in the garden without feeling self-conscious."
With those words, he had made a spacious courtyard for her. So, I looked for a condo with a large balcony where she could enjoy her coffee and read. It's smaller than our previous home, but the room is spacious enough to house the furniture my husband proudly chose. The piece of land that was gifted to us by Tony's grandfather was expansive, and the house sold for more than expected. With that money, I bought a rather luxurious condominium. The security is top-notch, so my worrywart husband would surely rest easy. And I heard rumors about my in-law's femother-in-law. Our old neighbors were worried about my sister-in-law's femother-in-law suddenly moving in. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's femother-in-law were left homeless. They even tried to borrow money from neighbors. In the end, they couldn't borrow anything and ended up living in public housing after consulting with the community. But they're stubborn people, so it seems the trouble never ends. From what I've heard, they caused a commotion by having a barbecue on their small balcony. Their thoughtless actions must have shocked the locals. And whether it's due to a lack of money or just frustration, they seem to have loud arguments every night. People are saying they're causing such a racket that it sounds like things are being thrown around. My sister-in-law's husband left a long time ago, and now it's just her and mother-in-law living together. It's quite the contrast to my peaceful life with my mother, although we're both two-member households. It seems that the neighbors are banding together to try and get this nuisance femother-in-law evicted. No matter where you go, if you're a nuisance, people won't welcome you. What goes around comes around. I just want to live peacefully and quietly, estranged from my embarrassing femother-in-law. I believe that Tony is surely watching over us. From now on, I plan to live my life without causing trouble to others, and do my best to live not just for myself, but for Tony as well.